Hello, everybody. This is Peter McLaughlin with BlueSky Hypnosis. This is Friday Live at 5. Today, we're going to be talking about ghosts, entities, and spiritual attachments. I haven't been broadcasting in a while. I've been in kind of a phase of figuring out what to do with this venue, and I had at least two viewers, one of whom had become a client, explain to me how important it was to them, and so I thought I'm going to bring it back. But would love it if you all would give me some ideas about future topics that you would like to see. Um, Standard disclaimer: I'm not a psychologist. I am not a doctor. If you have any significant physiological issues, mental health issues, check with your mental health professional or with your doctor. I can definitely help on both of those areas, but it's considered to be helping in an adjunctive way from a legal perspective. So we have that. If you have questions you want to ask the questions. That is by far the most interesting part of doing these live at fives for me, and I'm sure for everybody else too, because you will take us in directions we otherwise may not have gone in. You'll get me and you thinking about things, and the other people listening that I wouldn't have been thinking about. And I certainly do learn quite a bit from doing these. So please, if you have questions, ask the questions. If you just have comments about your experience that pertains to the topic that we're talking about today, spiritual entities, ghosts, things that you may have seen, maybe even as a little kid or experienced in some way, please bring that into this forum, and I will see if I can get to it. And that, as I said, will take us in different directions. And then, as I mentioned, if you have ideas for future topics, please feel free to bring those forward. Peter@BlueSkyHypnosis.com, or put it in the chat section. Let me just see who's here. English Rose, hello to you, English Rose. Glad that you are here, and glad Bella's here too. Martine Massey, welcome to you. Glad to see you. And Pika, glad you're here. Gary Katz, glad you're here. Estelle, it's kind of like Old Home Week. This is awesome. Can Greg, I haven't noticed your name before, but if you're new, welcome. And Joika, Sarah W. Oh, this is awesome. Kim the Cat, awesome. Glad to see you guys. Get those questions coming if you have them. So let's start with what is a ghost? What is a spiritual entity? What is a spiritual attachment? And we'll move into how they affect you and what you need to do to get rid of them. The first thing that I want to say is there's two parts of a human being. There is the physical part. We're all aware of what that is. You know, we can see, touch, and taste, I guess, hear, smell other people. And so that's how we know that they exist. And that's how we communicate with each other. We communicate with each other through our physical means. There's a second part of us, however, the energetic part of us, the part of us that we cannot detect with our five physical senses, generally speaking. There may be a slight exception with things like ghosts. And when a person dies, when their body dies, because that's the only part of them that dies, this energetic part of a human being does not die. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed, we are told by physics. So this other part of us, we call it maybe a spirit, we call it a soul, is supposed to go into the light, which we might say is heaven, or different cultures, like the Vikings might have said that's Valhalla. Others might call it Eden, or the afterlife. There's a million names for the same thing. But we live in a free will universe, and that soul, that spirit, doesn't have to leave the earth plane. They can stay on the earth plane. Now, we can't, generally speaking, see, touch, taste, feel, or smell them because our five physical senses are very limited in the frequency band that they can access. So if you have a radio, you have it tuned to one station, and that's your whole life, it's tuned to one station, you could easily be convinced that there's only one radio frequency broadcasting, say, classical music, or maybe it's broadcasting country music, and that's it. That's what music is. But there are all of these other frequencies that are being beamed or broadcast, excuse me, all around you. You just can't detect them with your five physical senses. So this entity, this being no longer has a physical body. They have chosen through free will not to leave the earth plane. This must be an incredibly frustrating situation. In fact, if you've ever had the situation with your smartphone, with your cell phone, of calling someone and you can hear them, but they keep saying, hello, 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 are you there? And you're like, yeah, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. And they still can't hear you. That's what I imagine it must be like for a spiritual entity that is existing on this plane, but they don't have the mechanism anymore. They don't have the physical tools in order to exist on this plane. Now, that entity can attach itself energetically to a living, breathing human being in a physical body. If this happens, then it can sort of corrupt or influence the host, if you will. So it's like a parasite and a host. All right, I want to see who else is here and if we have any questions. Sydney Morales says, I hope all is well. Yes, absolutely, Sydney. Thank you for your well wishes. Pika Chrissy says, I miss talking to you, Peter. I miss talking to you too. And thank you for sending me that email. Ellen Doyle says, do attachments stay from lifetime to lifetime? That's a really interesting question. And that's an example of what I said. Like, you guys will, it's like this hive mind thing. You'll ask questions that had never even occurred to me. I've never, ever considered that question. So I don't know the answer to that question. What I can say is that it has never come up in either the process of removing entities from people or in life between life regressions. But because I don't have direct experience, because I've never asked that question, say through a client who's in hypnosis, they're in a life between lives regression, for example, or communicated directly to the entity themselves and asked them the question, and from the books that I've read, I've never seen that question come up. It's an awesome question. I wish I had the answer to it. So I guess the short answer is I don't know, but thank you for asking. Here is Zulma. Zulma just said, hi, I just heard my husband call my name from the stairs and he's in the basement, and then this just popped up on my phone. I need to sage. Okay, glad you're here. Estelle says, how do you convince the attachment to leave you and go into the light? All right, that's a fabulous question. So we live in a free will universe, as I mentioned before. And what this means, what I've discovered over the years of doing these attachment removals, is that on some level, for an entity to attach to you, you have to agree to the attachment. Now, the attachment or the agreement doesn't have to be overt. It doesn't have to be you saying that you're agreeing to this entity attaching to you. It can be a very subtle kind of an agreement, or better word is tacit. So I like to use the example of if you left your door to the front door to your house open and you went on vacation for 2 weeks or a month, and you came home, it's conceivable that somebody could have walked into your house. You could walk into your house and it could be somebody sitting there in your living room watching TV with their feet up on the coffee table. That person, and I'm not a lawyer, but that person could argue that they had a right to come in your house because you left the front door open. And I could almost imagine a judge saying, well, you left the front door open. So that would constitute a tacit agreement. And in many cases, I would say in most cases, when there's difficulty in removing an entity, an attachment, it's because the client themselves on a subconscious level doesn't want the entity to be removed. And again, back to a free will universe, if the practitioner, someone like me, is really trying to help this person remove this entity, but on a deep subconscious spiritual level, they don't want the entity to be removed, you're going to have a fight on your hands. It's probably not going to work. And so in that case, and those are the trickiest cases, in that case, you would want to understand immediately. Let's say a person had 5 spiritual entities attached to them, and you went through the removal process, and you would do a check after you did the removal process to say, did we get them all? Let's say the answer is no, you didn't get them all. Did we get some of them? Yes. How many are remaining? Let's say there's one remaining. The next question would be, does the client have an emotional connection to this entity? Do they not want them to leave? The answer is almost always going to be yes. Now, you would say, perhaps, why would someone not want a spiritual entity to be removed? Because they can really mess with you. Well, one answer, and this is coming from doing this for the last 17 years, one answer could be the person has become so accustomed on a subconscious level to having these entities attached that they would feel lonely without them, that it's the fear of the unknown. Another reason could be that they actually know the entity that is attached to them. Let's say it could be a deceased relative. Well, how can you ask someone to remove, and they don't know it's a deceased relative, let's say at that point, a deceased relative that they loved? It could also be, let's say, if a woman was pregnant and she lost the baby, it could be the entity of the spirit or the soul of that baby. That woman's not going to give that entity up without a fight if you try to use violence, if you try to use, metaphorically, or force to tear them apart. In these cases, what you basically have to do is you have to prove to the client while they're in hypnosis that it's in their highest and best interest to release this entity, but more importantly, that it's in the best and highest interest of the entity themselves. You can also do a trial separation. And all of these things I have learned through trial and error over many, many, many years. A trial separation would be saying to the client, are you willing to release this entity for 45 seconds? With the proviso that after the 45 seconds is up, if you want, you can take that entity back. These are ways of kind of negotiating the client to be willing to use their free will to let the entity go. And if it were, for example, a baby that they had lost in pregnancy, you certainly wouldn't just send the baby into the light by himself or herself. You would bring a loving being from the other side, like, say, a mother in another lifetime. It could be a religious entity to come. It could also be a relative, like a grandparent of the client. That entity would come, take the baby in their arms so that the client, the mother, can feel comfortable about allowing the baby to go. So, really long answer, but a really, really great question, because this definitely comes up. In fact, it came up today. I was working with a client today who was able to release some of the entities, but couldn't release the other ones. And through the use of a pendulum, is she the one that's holding on to the entities? The answer was yes. And the reason was loneliness. She had had them with her for so long, she didn't want to let them go. All right, great question. Thank you so much for asking that. Let us see where we are here. Just kind of scrolling back up. And that was Estelle. Thank you so much, Estelle. That was a really, really good question. Gary Katz says, a few months ago, talked why not losing weight, felt trapped in a ditch, a hole, jail, or concentration camp. Did the pendulum tool and found out I had 16 attachments. Okay. Been a few months journey getting rid of them and setting self free. I am now very happy and free, but still not losing the weight. Okay, so first of all, congratulations for being able to release all 16 of those entities. And I would love to know, Gary, if you used my protocol on my YouTube channel, which is BlueSky Hypnosis. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. If you use that, it's like a 22-minute video that walks you through the whole process, talks about the whole concept. It shows you how to use a pendulum and how to determine with the pendulum if you have entities, and then it takes you through the removal process, and then you can use the pendulum at the end of the removal process to see if you removed all of them, some of them, or none at all. So would love to know about that. So the next question is, what about the weight? Why isn't the weight still going? Well, it's very likely, and I don't want to go too far afield on this in terms of weight loss, because I don't want to take our focus off the ball here, but it's likely that your subconscious mind believes that the additional weight is protecting you. You could use the same pendulum to ask that question. Am I holding on to the weight in order to protect myself? That's the most likely scenario. If it's not that, start using your creative mind to ask other questions about what it could be. Am I identifying with having additional weight? Am I identifying with a deceased relative? Is this a past life issue that I'm dealing with? So these are examples of what the additional weight could be that was not affected by getting rid of those entities. But, fantastic for feeling free, because that is the main feeling that people will describe when the entities have gone. And what's so amazing is that sometimes when people are confronted with this reality that the entities are going to be leaving, they start crying. They have this emotional attachment to the entities. And if you do it right, if you do it carefully in the manner I described before, then the removal process is very seamless. It's very smooth. It's very easy. When that occurs, the person feels this lightness. That is the most common feeling that people have. All right, thanks for those comments, Gary, and congratulations again to you for being able to remove those. Sarah W. Hello, Sarah. If someone is influencing you and you don't know it, does that have implications for free will? Yes, and I'm going to say that from a spiritual perspective, when you say, and you don't know it, what is probably meant by that is you don't consciously know it. My understanding of this realm is that if you know it subconsciously, then at least according to those on the other side, this would be like the dark side, they would say that they're not in violation of free will if you understand it at any level. So there's a concept that they use called the revelation of the method. Revelation of the method. And what that means is, before they do some heinous act, they let you as an individual or us as a group know that this is coming, that this is what they're going to do. Now, this revelation of the method could occur inside of in quotation marks, a fictional movie. It could happen in a cartoon. It could happen, I guess, in the lyrics of a song. It could happen in some way that we would consider benign and our conscious mind would disregard, but our subconscious mind would receive. And according to them, from my understanding, that would mean that they were not in violation of free will. And I think we have to begin, well, first of all, we have to understand that the subconscious mind is literal. It takes everything literally like a 4-year-old does. So all of your words, everything you consume through your eyes, through your ears, through your skin, everything is taken literally. And I've done Friday Lives on word magic before. I think I will do this again. I'm actually reading another book on the topic right now. When you think of common words that we use, our conscious mind doesn't pay any attention to the word, but our subconscious mind hears something entirely different, like the phrase weekdays, Monday through Friday. What are Monday through Friday? Well, those are weekdays. What is Saturday and Sunday? That's the weekend. Well, if you hear those words differently, say literally like the subconscious mind, what do you hear? You hear week, W-E-A-K, weekdays, maybe even D-A-Z-E, weekdays. And for Saturday and Sunday, you hear weekend. Little children learn how to spell. They engage in spelling like a witch. Casts spells. They engage in spelling. Your words are magic. And there's all kinds of stuff happening right in front of us that we have been conditioned to not notice consciously, because once you notice something consciously, you take the power out of it. So I find this stuff absolutely fascinating, and it's a great question, and I hope, Sarah, that I answered it. If I didn't, please put another comment in there, and I will follow up to the extent that I can. Here's Jane Kasenik. Hello, Jane. Pika Chrissy says, can't see or hear any of my spirit guides, but I know they are there. There have been things happening that I cannot explain. Yeah, I mean, I think the key here is to operate both in the physical body and be aware and pay attention to your energetic self. To operate obviously in your conscious mind, but also be aware of your subconscious mind, what's going in your subconscious mind, how to program your subconscious mind for the results that you want. And I believe that this takes practice. This takes effort. And Pika Chrissy, there may be something that is blocking you. There may be a reason why your subconscious mind is afraid of you connecting with spirit guides, for example. And that's something that you could use a pendulum to determine, do I have a block to meeting with my spirit guides? Okay. Madeline Boshoff says, how do you know if you have attachments? Great question. And I would say there are three possible levels of knowing that you have an attachment. The first level, which I suppose would be enough to get your attention. It's almost like, how do you know if you're sick? Well, you get symptoms. And those symptoms could be very significant, or they could be kind of subtle, like, oh, a little scratchy throat, or, nose is running, or eyes are red, or something like that. Or it could be more dramatic. And I would say it would be the same with a spiritual attachment. So some people talk about, they might say they just don't feel like themselves. It might be that they enter into a rage or an anger, and they don't know why. Because it never happened before. Or it could be that they have certain compulsions or cravings. And I'm not saying that a person can't go into a rage for no other reason. I'm just saying this is an indication. This is the sort of first or outer level, if you think of concentric rings, of going towards knowing that you have an entity attached to you. So let's call the outer ring the ring of symptoms, and the symptoms I described are common for people to report when this is indeed the case. The next concentric ring in would be, in my case, using a pendulum. And on that video on my YouTube channel, which is the email I sent out promoting today's live, has a link to that in there. If you're not on that email list, please consider joining it. It's in the description of this video. It teaches you how to use a pendulum. And once you have calibrated the pendulum, in other words, you know what your yes answer is, you know what your no answer is, you know what your maybe answer is, you know if it's a good time to ask questions and receive accurate answers, and maybe you've already asked a question that just to see if it's working, like, is my body currently seated in a chair? And I get a yes to that, I'm like, okay. Then the next question, good time to ask questions, as I mentioned, and receive accurate answers. Get a yes to that. Cool, now I'm calibrated. Now I can ask, do I have any spiritual entities attached to me and or to my being? You're either going to get a yes or a no to that question. If you get a yes, that's your second indication that this is going on. And when I work with clients, those two are enough for me. But the third one, if you felt like you needed a third one, could be you meet either with your spirit guide, or especially because we're in this realm that can be kind of scary. And let's say that your religion is Christianity. I'm just saying that because that's still, I think, the dominant religion in the West. If that's your religion, or even if you don't go to church, if you have like a comfort level with ascended masters, beings within that construct that you're comfortable with, you can make them your spirit guide. And in hypnosis, you can ask that being that you already trust, do I have any spirit entities that are attached to me? And if that being that you trust gives you the answer, they can give you a yes or a no. That's your third level of confirmation if that's what you need. For me, after doing this for so long, I'm totally satisfied with the pendulum. That is enough. And then I suppose after the fact, you can have a fourth level of confirmation, which would be if the person removes the entities and they feel better in the moment, and or if their life changes in positive ways. And there have been so many people that I've worked with that not only said, for example, that they felt lighter, but later, in subsequent sessions, they just say, ever since we did that, everything has changed for me with respect to X, with respect to Y and Z and so on. There are certainly cases, many of them, where a person, as they're going through the process of removing an entity, they get a physical pain. Not everybody, by any means. A smaller percentage of people, maybe like, 10, 15%. And by the time the last entity is gone, physical pain is also gone. That's also kind of interesting. I don't know that that's confirmation or anything. And none of these things would be accepted by the way science is practiced. But it's certainly a long-winded answer to your question, and I hope it makes sense to you. Thanks for asking. English Rose, mom vlogger, says, can attachments move from person to person? I know they can during intimacy, like an STD, but what about without that? Okay, that's a great question, and I'll use that answering that question as a segue to talk about how somebody can be vulnerable to an attachment, because that will also answer the question. So, just like English Rose said, that yes, they can move from person to person during physical intimacy, during sexual intimacy, like an STD, like a spiritual, like a spiritual STD, I guess you would call it, sexually transmitted disease. So yes, they can move that way. They don't do that every single time, even if party A has one and party B doesn't, but they can, because there's a melding or an opening with that physical expression with that act. The other most common way that a person can be vulnerable to an attachment is through alcohol and drug use. Doesn't matter whether the drugs are legal or they're illegal. Alcohol, as I've mentioned before, in English is called alcohol, liquor, booze, spirits. We say that a person is under the influence of alcohol. Well, if they're under the influence of alcohol, then by definition, linguistically, they would be under the influence of spirits. I don't think it's a mistake that liquor was termed spirits, and that can create a vulnerability. My belief about the drugs, the mind-altering drugs, is that some of them, like plant medicine, like ayahuasca, for example, is designed to be used ceremonially. I even think, this is just my personal opinion, I even believe that marijuana is designed to be used as plant medicine, is designed to be used spiritually, not as, 15, 16-year-olds whooping it up at a party. And if something is used ceremonially, I think that part of the ceremony creates protection around the person that's going to be receiving this substance, let's call it. And what I say to people, without saying I think that mind-altering substances are good or bad, is if you're going to do that, make sure that before you engage in it, you call in your spirit guides. You call in angels, you call in ascended masters, and you say, I'm about to engage in this thing, and I'm going to be spiritually vulnerable. I'm going to be spiritually wide open while I do this, and I would like you to protect me while I do these things, and to allow me to use this experience to grow in important spiritual ways. So back to your question, English Rose, about can an entity transfer from one person to another beyond the act of physical intimacy? And I'm going to say yes, but it all depends upon the person that's being transferred to. is that person vulnerable? So let's say it's not physical intimacy. Are they vulnerable for another reason? Are they vulnerable because they are under the influence of alcohol or drugs of some sort? Because if they are, then the transfer could occur that way. So it's all kind of, in my experience, based upon, do you have your armor on or do you not? And the armor, the spiritual armor, is essentially, are you vibrating at a high frequency? Are you vibrating, towards or at the frequency of love? Or are you vibrating at a low frequency? Are you vibrating at the frequency of anger and rage? Are you vibrating at the frequency of depression and despair? Are you vibrating at the frequency of hate for yourself or for others? Because that's where you become a perfect match for entities, because entities would go to the light if they weren't already vibrating at a low frequency themselves. The light would feel like home to them. It doesn't if they're vibrating at that low frequency. So if you vibrate at a low frequency, you look like home, you become a match, and then you can have the attachment. So hopefully that makes sense, English Rose. And thank you for asking the question. Sydney Morales says, this is very fitting for an eclipse full moon in Scorpio, laugh out loud. I always experience the paranormal during Scorpio moons. Well, that's either kismet or dumb luck on my part. So thank you for pointing that out. That's really cool. Pika Chrissy says, I've been wanting to talk with you for a long time. I'm always here, Pika. Peter at BlueSkyHypnosis.com. So thank you for being here. What are the signs of attachment that you can notice in another person? I would say behaving in ways that they don't usually behave. I mean, we notice that, I would say, with people who drink. That when they're sober, they behave one way, and when they're drunk, they behave in an entirely different way. Not everybody, but some people do. Could that be? Could that addiction, for example, be the sign of an entity attachment? Absolutely. Could rage, like a real frothing at the mouth kind of rage that seems to come out of nowhere, be a sign of an entity attachment? Yeah, it could be. I had a situation where I witnessed that with someone in my circle, and so I guess this is another piece that I wasn't even going to talk about, but I was able to use my pendulum, get a hit of a yes, that's what's going on. I was able to ask my guides if I could facilitate, not do, but could I facilitate a removal? I got a yes to that question. So in my consciousness, there's my dog walking by, in a hypnotic state, I was able to invite the other person into the sacred space that I had created, which I always create when I go into hypnosis, self-hypnosis, you could call it meditation, and meet with me and with my guides. And I asked that person in this sacred space, I alerted them, I said, there's an entity attached to you, and it's causing this experience for you. Are you willing to remove it? And they said yes in this space. Again, it's all energetic. And so that person gave permission to my guides to remove the entity. And this was a really unusual one because it wasn't a run-of-the-mill entity like a human being that no longer has a physical body. It was a demon. And what I saw in my consciousness was I saw very quickly this dragon, this face of a dragon, with this red mouth that was kind of grinning at me as it was taken off into the light. And it happened that fast. I mean, I probably got a glimpse of it for what it felt like, much longer than it was, I think. It felt like it was, 5 seconds that this thing looked at me, but it was probably more like a second, and then it was gone. And when I encountered that person again, who didn't know that this had happened consciously, subconsciously they did, it was like something had shifted, something had transformed. And there are more details to the story, but I think you get the idea of how this can work. Just see. So back to Zulma. Zulma said, "How can you notice the signs of attachment in another person?" I would say it's acting out of character, extreme kinds of behavior, maybe even on-off, where one minute you feel like you're with them, and the next minute you feel like you're with, like, who are you? You know, like we have that vernacular in our culture. Like somebody behaves in a certain way, like, I feel like I don't even know you. Who are you? Now that doesn't mean that they have an entity attached to them. It's back to that idea of symptoms. Like just because a person, you know, is sneezing, it doesn't mean they're about to get the flu, but it could. They might even have a slightly elevated temperature and it feels like they have a fever, but it turns out later, well, that wasn't the beginning of the flu, it was something else. But you get my idea, right? Something is off. And I think that something significant like a gambling compulsion where they can't stop gambling, or a drug addiction or alcohol addiction, I think these all potentially have a spiritual dimension to them. And I think we will reach a place in our evolution as a society where we routinely look for this sort of thing. I have wondered for decades whether people with mental illness don't have some kind of entity that is attached to them, or entities plural. And that is and it's almost like it's overwhelmed them. You know, like if parasites attach themselves to you, you generally can go about your life. You may have some symptoms of a parasitical attachment, like through your GI tract. But as long as you're strong, you can continue to function. But you could imagine a person having an overrun of parasites where now they're like bedridden. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And if you want to ask a follow-up question, feel free to do so. Martine Massey says, since I lived in our house 27 years now, every time I open the door, I get a feeling that I don't want to live here at all. And I do not like to live there because it doesn't feel good. That's a symptom. That's an energetic symptom. And so what you could do is you could use your pendulum to determine, why don't you feel good there? Did you live in that house in another lifetime? Are you sensing something dark that happened in that house? Is there an entity living in that house that is dark? So, you know, I haven't talked a lot today about ghosts, but I think a ghost is a human being that doesn't have a physical body anymore, that used their free will to stay on this plane and not go into the light. And why would they stay on this plane? Well, it could be because they're afraid of what happens next. It could be maybe they behaved a certain way in their life and they think they're going to hell and they don't want to go to hell. And they're afraid that that's what's going to happen if they leave this plane. So they hold on to it. Maybe they worked so hard for their possession, for their house, that they don't want to leave it. You know, like this attachment, there's that word, to a physical location. Or maybe it's an attachment to a person that's still on this planet. That happens all the time. And I think in a way, again, this is just my opinion, but I think in a way that what I'm calling a spiritual attachment is actually what we might call a ghost. Now, why would it be possible then to actually see with your physical eyes, to see a ghost? Because people do report this. I've never seen one, so I can't speak from firsthand experience. But I do think that it's possible that certain houses, like a haunted house, for example, has an energetic quality about it that allows those frequencies I was talking about before. So if we're operating on the 97.9 frequency and the ghost is operating on the 99.7 frequency, that there's something about the house that causes that frequency, almost like a radio receiver, to shift under certain conditions, whereby you could catch a glimpse of an entity, of a ghost. That's just one theory. I don't know if it's true or not. Maybe it's the case that when the energy is high enough about the circumstances of the death, for example, of the ghost, that we can slide into that frequency. So maybe a battlefield. These are just theories. I'm not saying, yeah, that's what it is. But those are just some theories that I offer up about the whole concept of ghosts. So Martine, I would suggest that you use a pendulum and see if you can get to the root cause, the bottom of why you're having that uneasy feeling, the symptom of being in that house. And chances are good that if you keep asking different questions, you'll get a hit on something and you'll begin to understand why you have that feeling. Thanks for asking the question. I want to make sure that I kind of get through the different pieces. So we talked about a spirit entity defined, that physical versus the non-physical part of us. The other thing I want to say too is the distinction between what our society would call real and what our society would call fiction. Well, that's bullshit. I can't see it. I can't touch it, taste it, smell it, hear it. So it must not exist. Well, the bottom line, even to people that don't believe in this, is that if you get a yes with your pendulum, at a minimum, it means your subconscious mind believes this is what is going on. And as long as your subconscious mind believes it and it's leading to a negative outcome, that has to be reversed. So I just wanted to mention that. So we talked about vulnerability, how they affect you. We talked about free will. Free will is that concept of, at some level, even a tacit level, you have to give permission to the entity to attach to you. This means that's exactly how you then remove them, is you revoke the free will. So you can say, yes, you're exercising your free will, that you're going to marry this other person. Our culture, our society, and our legal system says, if you don't want to be married anymore, you can essentially revoke, through using your free will, that contract that you established with this other person. That process obviously is called divorce. That's basically what you're doing with these entities, is that you're using your free will in reverse, if you will. Okay, maybe I gave you permission, maybe it was tacit, maybe I left my door open, by playing a game that I thought was a game, but everything is literal. And that's when the attachment occurred. Maybe it was I was feeling really lonely as a child. Maybe it was I was feeling a sense of grief after I lost that baby. And now I'm reversing that permission. And so some of the language that I use that's in that video on my YouTube channel that's linked to in the email that I sent out about today is I hereby invoke my divine right to the sanctity of my body, to the sanctity of my being, that this body and this being is for me and for me only. And you no longer have permission to be attached to me and or to my being, and therefore you must leave. This is the core of how we do the removal. Because my understanding is that, as I said before, with that whole concept of revelation of the method, is that the most sort of evil, dark forces are subject to the laws of the universe, and therefore are subject to the laws of free will. And that I think that the reason why sort of the devil, the Satan character, is known as the great deceiver is that he cannot violate your free will. They can use all kinds of pressure on you to get you to, to do what they want you to do, to use trickery, to play on greed. But ultimately, you have to participate. And at any moment, you can revoke that agreement. You can revoke that participation. And that is what we do in order to remove an entity. And once we do that, we then use a pendulum again. Did I successfully remove all of the spiritual entities that were attached to me and or to my being? Because your subconscious is literal. We don't want your subconscious to think, well, it was never attached to your body, so you didn't remove it. So being encompasses the energetic part of you. Hopefully that all makes sense. Let's see what else we have here. Jane Kasenik says, 3 times in as many weeks between the hours of 3 and 5 a.m., a male voice calls my name. Once was clearly my brother, is clear and loud that I will actually answer. Could that be a spirit guide or something else? So it sounds, Jane, like you're saying it was the voice of your brother. If that's what you're hearing, my first inclination would be it is the voice of your brother. And the thing to keep in mind here about hearing things and seeing things, and I'm not denying at all that people don't with their physical eyes see a ghost like on a battlefield or in an old haunted house, or they hear the voice of somebody speaking to them. But I think it's much more common and much more likely that just like when a person is in a state of deep hypnosis, they can see things with their inner sight. They can hear things with their inner sense of hearing. And sometimes it is so vivid that it seems like you're in the room talking to that person. And I think if you get to a significant depth of your consciousness, there probably is no distinction between physically being in a room with another human, talking to them, and being in a spiritual communication. But if you're awake, if your conscious mind is active, I think your chances of having that kind of vivid experience is a little bit diminished. Now, the one experience that I have had in my life whereby things were so vivid, even though I was awake, I'll just share this briefly. I was doing past life regression with 3 other students in 2006 that I was doing my hypnotherapy training with. And one of the students was pretty advanced, and he was using this crystal singing bowl. And he was kind of channeling these different voices to under the protection of divine entities and bringing us into a deep, deep, deep hypnotic state. And we were all practiced into going into hypnosis. So I went into a deep hypnotic state, sitting in this circle with three other men. And I spontaneously met an ascended master, Mary, and I had tears in my eyes because I said to her, and this is weird because it's not like, oh, I'm consciously I didn't even know she was going to appear. And when she did, I thanked her for loving me. And I just remember she just said, I've always loved you. And I was just crying. And then I spontaneously went into a past lifetime where I was a child, like a 12-year-old child maybe. And I was standing on the back of like a monk. And I was looking through a stained glass window, and it was like medieval times. And it was night, and I was looking out over a moor. And then in the next scene in that life, I was in a carriage, and I was sitting on the seat of this carriage, and I could see and feel with fine detail the cracked leather seat of this carriage, and I could hear the wheels going and the horses, as this carriage is going through the night. And then almost just as fast, I was transported to ancient Egypt, and I had much darker skin, and my stature was tall but much thinner than I am now. And I had on this white robe, and it was the most white thing I've ever seen in my life. I could feel it and see it. So I think in an even deeper state, it would really feel like I was seeing these things and hearing them. So again, I'm not saying that people don't see ghosts with their physical eyes. I believe that is possible. But this is another level. And certainly when you're sleeping, or you're in that half awake state, you can be, by definition, in a very deep state of hypnosis. So that may have been your brother speaking to you. I would use a pendulum to dig deeper into this. Was that my brother? Was it a spirit guide? What's going on here? And what kind of message are they trying to send me? Is it in my highest and best interests to communicate with them or not? If I communicate with them, should I bring in protection from loving and powerful entities? So that pendulum is a powerful tool for you. And I would just briefly say that a pendulum is not, you're not in general accessing anything outside of you. It's basically amplifying what your body is already telling you. You know how if you're walking, I don't know, down a dark street at night and somebody's following you, your spidey senses may go off and you'll be like, this doesn't feel safe. Or you meet someone at a party and you're like, there's something about this person that just doesn't feel right. Well, your body's communicating to you in both of those scenarios. And your body's always communicating to you, even with much more subtle things. Like, I wonder if I should buy this thing, or should I call my friend June, or is it time to get up right now? Or, I'm feeling like I want to eat such and such. Your body is always communicating to you, but the communication might be so subtle that you don't recognize it. And the pendulum is really just amplifying what's already going on inside of your body, for example, with the response to asking a question. So my advice is use the pendulum, see where that gets you, and let us know. So Martine is saying no problems with being in the house of my neighbors, just in my own. I get that. So yeah, see if you can drill into that and figure out what's going on. English Rose says, I had the baby attachment until you helped me remove it. I can see why I wouldn't want to let the baby go. I felt so much guilt, but now am at peace with it. Thank you. Well, you're absolutely 100% welcome, of course. And that's a great first person explanation of how you can get into a situation like that. And we should never just assume that an entity is bad. I think the sort of operating assumption that I go with is that the entity is confused. It just doesn't, it's afraid. And our job is to help it move from the person that it's attached itself to into the light. But then there are these other circumstances where the entity could have a powerful relationship with the client a powerful relationship with the entity. And we want to be aware of that. We never want to just tear away, like in this case, a baby that might have died during pregnancy from the mother. We would never do that. We would want to be as careful and as compassionate as we possibly can be for the well-being of the baby and the well-being of the client. So thank you, English Rose, for sharing that experience with us. Really appreciate that. Estelle says thank you. Well, you're welcome, and thank you back to you too for supporting the channel. Oh, cool. Gary Katz says yes, he used the 22, I think it was a 22-minute video to help remove the 16 entities that were attached to him. So that video again it gives you an overall description. It teaches you how to use a pendulum, how to ask the right questions of the pendulum, to go through the removal process, and then to check in with the pendulum to see if you were successful fully, partially, or not at all. And it all does this in this kind of condensed 22-minute version. So if any of you are interested, I'd encourage you to check that out. If you have friends that might be like something weird's going on, I don't feel like myself, maybe they just watch the video. Just no harm, no foul. Can Greg says, how do you know if you have an attachment? Do you hear them or feel them? So I won't go too deep into this because I covered this a little bit earlier, but I talked about these concentric rings. So the first outer ring would be symptoms. That would be like you just feel off. Maybe you have compulsions that you didn't have before, or maybe you just get angry and you don't know why, or you hear voices in your head, or you just feel like there's this, something is not right. The next step would be use a pendulum and check with the pendulum to see if you have an entity attachment. Third one would be, and you don't have to use that, but it would be checking with your spirit guide, asking your spirit guide in hypnosis, do I have any spiritual entities attached to me and or to my being? So that would be, and you can certainly rewatch parts of this or watch the 22-minute video that I have. Thanks for asking the question. I gotta move. Battery died. Pika Chrissy says, Pika Chrissy is asking a similar question. How do I know if someone I love who has passed away is around me, because I can't see or feel them? The answer is really your inner senses. This is a part of us that is completely overlooked. Your inner sense of sight, your inner sense of hearing, your inner sense of feeling, your inner sense of knowing. And a pendulum is just a tool to amplify an inner sense. So that's a really good tool that answers your question, I think. Thanks for asking. I'll take one or two more, and then we'll bid each other adieu for a lovely weekend. And I guess what I will say is, at the moment, I'm planning on continuing doing the Friday Lives, but I think I might just reduce the cadence a little bit. I might do it like, say, once a month, and give a couple of weeks notice when it's coming up so everybody can be aware that this is going to occur. Because I think it does make sense to keep doing it. But make sure that you send me ideas for topics that you would like to see, because I start going, oh man, what am I going to do? So, all right, let's take a couple more. Let's see. Real Pamster says, why do I sometimes feel like someone put their hand on my shoulder? Because I think energetically, let's say a person doesn't have a body anymore, and they want to touch you. My belief is, and I can't be sure about this at all, but my belief is that you can communicate. Well, I know you can communicate with that person mind to mind, thought to thought. And let's say that in this state of communication with them, the telepathic, like mind to mind, thought to thought communication with them, you're going back and forth with them. And let's say that you can, in this inner senses, you can see them maybe, you can hear them, you can feel them. Maybe it's just one of those senses. And they reach over and put their hand on your shoulder. Well, we have the ability, I believe, to process that kind of touch. You know, a person, I mean, I don't want to go too off the deep end here, but a person could become aroused by seeing something in their mind's eye, by hearing something in their mind's ear, and that could affect their physical body. Well, why couldn't the same thing happen with a touch? So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but thank you for the question, and I think that makes sense. But let me know if it doesn't. All right, Kim the cat. How can I help family, friends, and spirit be in contact and keep any nasties away? Great question. Keeping nasties away, we'll start there. Keep your vibration high. You know, have a daily practice. That could be prayer, could be meditation, could be self-hypnosis, could be qigong, tai chi. It could be being in nature, the music you listen to, TV shows that you watch, movies that you watch, the food that you eat, the cleanliness of your clothes, the cleanliness of the space around you, the words that you use. And it doesn't mean that you can't eat a Twinkie here and there. It doesn't mean you can't use profanity now and then. It just has to mean that the overwhelming milieu in which you are operating physically, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally has a higher vibration, a higher frequency. If you find yourself getting stuck in a lower frequency, like if a person is depressed for a long period of time, that's when you become vulnerable. Be careful if you're using mind-altering substances. If you're going to do that, make sure that you bring in protection. That's how you would keep the nasties away in your words. How can you help family, friends, and spirit be in contact? Well, every day I go into meditation, self-hypnosis, and I bring with me in my consciousness, my dog, who's still in physical body. I bring in another dog who's not in a physical body anymore. I assemble my guides around me, my spirit guide, and two ascended masters, and an angel. Excuse me. And then I have two more relatives whom I love just outside of the circle who are no longer in a physical body either. So I proactively remain in contact with them through this method. And the more you do this, the more real it feels to the rest of you. So that's what I would say about those two questions. All right, let's take one more. Here, and so many good questions here. Ashley Smith, is attachments where addictions come from? Because I'm dealing with a few for years and I can't seem to drop them. It can. And think about the relationship between an addiction and an entity. So if the addiction is a drug, if the addiction is alcohol, if the addiction is tobacco or vaping, if the addiction is a sexual addiction, all of those things will well, put the sexual one off to the side. Those other ones will lower your vibratory frequency, thus making you vulnerable to an attachment. So in some, it may be a chicken and the egg thing. In some cases, it may be an entity attachment caused or is fueling or somehow pushing you in the direction of that addiction. Because let's face it, that entity may have had that addiction in their lifetime and they want that again. Or it could be that you started playing around with something. And part of the addiction is while you were in that state, you became vulnerable to entities attaching themselves to you. Hopefully that makes sense. So the short answer is yes, this is definitely a possibility. In fact, when I work with clients and they say to me that they have an addiction, that's the first thing I'm thinking is if they've had an addiction for a certain period of time, I'm guessing 95% possibility or likely that they have entities attached to them. And the first step would be to remove those entities. The next thing would be, okay, is there anything else that's going on that's fueling this addiction? Because the next step would be, what pain is this client trying to mask? What pain are they trying to distract themselves from by engaging in that addiction? So I'm looking at clearing out all of the possible reasons why that person could be attached themselves to, let's say, alcohol, before we go for removing the alcohol. And what often happens, it happened twice in this past week, like in the past 14 days, twice. Two clients. One said that they had been drinking every single day for 27 years and just gone. And I don't know if this is going to stick, but my God, every single day for 27 years, and now they're free of this for like 10 days or something. And whether it sticks or it doesn't, I don't know yet. It's amazing that this occurred without us having to like go into any detail about the actual, in the case of this person, alcohol. And the second person, something very, very similar happened, almost identical. So absolutely, I would look at that and also work on raising your frequencies. I don't know what the addiction is in your case, but most of them bring your frequency level at which you're vibrating down. That's where you become a home for the entity. So whether that the attachment led to the addiction in the first place, or being in that state led to attachments, or both, frankly, there is very likely a connection there. So awesome question. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys, for showing up, especially after I've had such a long hiatus. I really, really, really appreciate you supporting the channel, for turning up here, and for asking such great questions, for supporting each other. It really warms my heart, and I sincerely appreciate this. I hope you guys have a fabulous weekend coming up wherever you are in the world. I know that people tune in from all over the world. Send me ideas, please, about other topics that you would like to see. Peter@BlueSkyHypnosis.com. If there are questions that you think I might be able to answer for you, please feel free to ask me those questions on my personal email. I do have free 20-minute sessions if you're interested in working with me, but you're not sure. And my website, BlueSkyHypnosis.com, under booking has that free 20-minute option that you can certainly avail yourselves of. Again, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. I will definitely publicize it, probably like 10 days, 2 weeks in advance, maybe even send out 2 emails letting you know that this is on the calendar, it's coming up, here's what the topic is, this is what we'll be talking about. Take care.